No matter how late he got off shift on Sunday mornings, she made sure he was present and accounted for at Mount Zion's morning services. But back when he was a kid, and there under duress, he'd slept through a lot of it and paid scant attention to the rest. At the time, all that crap about loving your neighbor as yourself just didn't grab him. Unsurprisingly, once in high school, Darius had taken up with the wrong crowd, which had led him straight into the arms of the wrong kind of girl. Gypsy Tompkins had been bad news from the get-go. She was a wild child who was beautiful but tough as nails. Once she had Darius in her clutches, everything his grandmother had ever tried to teach him went out the window. Compared to him, Gypsy had been tiny, 5'2" and barely 100 pounds soaking wet. But from the time Darius was 15, he had been putty in her vividly manicured hands. Eventually, since Gypsy's family was involved in the drug trade, Darius was too. As for their personal relationship, it lasted for years, but had become more and more volatile over time, until recurring bouts of domestic violence between them became the order of the day. Gypsy always knew exactly which buttons to push to drive Darius over the edge. As soon as she succeeded, she'd call the cops on him, screaming into the phone that he was beating her or threatening to kill her. Once officers showed up, she would somehow manage to convince them that he was the one at fault. As a consequence, he was the one who usually got hauled off to jail. The next day, of course, when they'd let him out because Gypsy hadn't gone through with pressing charges, she'd laugh it off and act like it was all some kind of joke. Darius knew this was messed up and wrong, but he loved her and could never quite bring himself to walk away. During their last screaming match, she had pulled a knife on him. He'd managed to get it away from her, but in the course of the struggle, she'd sliced open her hand and was still bleeding when she called 911. This time, though, when he went to jail, Gypsy did press charges. He ended up doing 6 months in the King County Jail for assault. When he got out, he learned that she had sworn out a protection order on him. He wasn't allowed inside the house even long enough to collect his stuff. Left with nothing but the clothes on his back and nowhere to live, he'd gone crawling back to Granny. Once on the outside, he'd soon learned that Gypsy had taken up with someone else during his absence. 2 months later, Gypsy and her new boyfriend had been found shot to death in an alleyway in the Denny Regrade. Darius was her ex, so naturally the cops came around asking questions. His job as a bouncer, the one Granny had found for him, had saved his bacon, though, because at the time of Gypsy's death, he'd been at work at a place with all kinds of surveillance cameras, and those had given Darius an airtight alibi. That didn't mean the cops didn't question him about it, or check his hands for gunshot residue. But eventually there was nothing to link him to the double homicide, and he was cleared. Darius knew it was only by the grace of God and Granny's job that he'd dodged being charged and possibly even convicted of the 2 murders. That was one of the reasons, maybe even the main one, that this time when he accompanied Granny to services at Mount Zion, he did pay attention. He found himself listening intently to what the Reverend had to say. He let himself get caught up in both the word and the music. Finally, one Sunday, when people were invited to come forward to be saved, he got up and went, finding himself a whole new lease on life in the process. Which was why, this year, when the call went out for Mount Zion's crew of volunteers for serving Thanksgiving Day dinner at the food bank, Darius had signed up. It was well after dark when, while patrolling the line, Darius caught sight of an older woman leaning heavily on the end of her overloaded shopping cart. A few sprigs of white hair stuck out from under her hoodie. Swaying unsteadily on her feet, she looked as though she was about to keel over. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. "You don't have to wait in line. If you're not feeling well, I'll be glad to escort you inside." No, she said quickly. "I'm too tired to eat anything. If you just walk me back to my van, I'll be fine." "Where is it?" he asked. "Over there, a block or 2, she said, nodding toward the south. "Are you sure? Do you think you can make it that far?" "I believe so," she said. "But would you mind helping with the cart? I have some money I can pay you."